So, after almost a decade in power, Justin Trudeau has announced that he will be resigning as Prime Minister of Canada, which is a pretty solid run, all things considered. It's about 6 years less than his dad served as PM, but 9 years, pretty respectable. But as I said, it's all come to an end. So why did this all fall apart so quickly for Trudeau after nearly a decade in power? So first things first, and most importantly, is that if you didn't hear, Justin Trudeau has announced that he will be resigning both as Canada's Prime Minister and as the leader of Canada's Liberal Party, but that he will not officially leave those posts until the Liberal Party can elect a leader to take his place. And if this to you is a bit of a surprise as a non-Canadian, I do not blame you. I fell for this too living in Australia, and that is the fact that Justin Trudeau has a much better image internationally than he does domestically. And Canadians have nowhere near the favourable opinion of him that most Americans or anyone abroad really might have. To give you a sense of what I'm talking about and actually show you an example, Justin Trudeau was elected 3 times. The first time, all the way back in 2015, very successful election by Canadian standards, large majority in the House of Commons in Canada, leading in the popular vote. But in 2019, during his re-election campaign, Trudeau did win re-election, but it was as a minority government, meaning he didn't have a majority of seats in the House of Commons and had to rely on sort of wavery, weird support from minor parties, and he didn't win the popular vote. And then in 2021, Trudeau called another election, this time an early election, and the exact same thing happened. Trudeau with the most seats in the Canadian Parliament, but not a majority, and he again lost the popular vote to the Conservative Party. So since 2019, which makes up a majority of his time in office, he's been operating as a minority government and as the second most popular party in Canada behind the Conservatives. And look, Trudeau really hasn't been in a good place, neither has his party really in the post-COVID years, 2022 onwards. Look, Canada made a very interesting decision when it came to how to recover, and this strategy did work. I can't fault them for the raw results. Canada is the second fastest recovering economy in the Western world behind the United States, but they achieved that mostly through low-skilled immigration. We're talking about an active goal on behalf of the Canadian government of introducing 500,000 permanent residencies a year. This was during an existing housing crisis where there were not enough homes to go around. On top of that, a bunch of new competition was introduced, which drove wages down, which was already occurring during a cost of living crisis, which really just, look, Liberal Canada, famously left-wing Canada, which is very, very, very pro-immigration. Currently, Canadians have a 60% disapproval rating of the government's immigration policy. And if Canada is that antagonistic towards your immigration policy, you've probably done something wrong. And Trudeau did realize this and tried to walk back most of his immigration policy post-COVID in November of last year, but a little bit too little too late if most Canadians were asked. And look, all of this eventually caught up with Trudeau, and probably a little bit of incumbency fatigue was also thrown in there, but really over the last year and a half or so, the polling has really, really been dire. We are talking about polling where it is not unusual week to week to see the Conservatives up by 20 points over the Liberal Party. And look, it really came to a head with the membership itself, where over the last couple of months, Liberal Party caucuses, groupings within Parliament, Liberal members have told Trudeau that he has to go. I believe the last thing we saw, it was about 80% of MPs together was somewhat expressing that Trudeau's time was up. But again, I would be remiss if I didn't mention this, that in most Western democracies, incumbency fatigue is a very, very real thing. At a certain point, if you have been in power for long enough, eventually people do just want to see a change for whatever reason. And I can't stress enough how long Trudeau has been in office. He has been there since 2015. He came to power during the Obama years. And I think that, I may be wrong here, please fact check me in the comments if I'm wrong. I believe in Western nations, he is the longest serving current head of government. The US president is swapping out. The Australian government isn't even 3 years old. The British government has just swapped around. I'm fairly certain, barring maybe some sketchy pseudo-democracies at the far east of Europe, that he is the longest-serving head of state currently in a Western democracy. And look, I assume people feel that. I mean, it's one of the great truths of democracy, like Western democracies, which is that if you're in power for long enough, eventually, statistically, during an election year, things are not going to be good for you and you will be removed. It is just a guarantee. And unfortunately for Trudeau, that just seems to be where he is at the moment. So with the history and all that in mind, what are the next couple of months actually going to look like? Well, the first thing is that, well, you know now that Justin Trudeau is part of a minority government. All of the opposition parties, which all together make up a majority of the Canadian Parliament, have now all agreed that when Parliament comes back into session, they are going to vote no confidence in Justin Trudeau and his government, which essentially will trigger an election automatically. So to avoid that, Justin Trudeau has suspended Parliament until late March. The Canadian Parliament was meant to sit at some point in January, but Trudeau has pretty much made a power play, as it were, to give his party as much time as possible to elect a new leader before they have to go to an election. Because as soon as Parliament sits, there will be a vote of no confidence in the government, the Liberal Party will lose, and they will be forced into an election. So all Trudeau is doing is buying time. Because if they went into a parliamentary session, like I mentioned, they'd be facing an election now with no time to elect a new leader. So, which I assume is definitely not what Trudeau wanted. So we will probably witness close to 3 months of political infighting in Canada's Liberal Party as they scrounge over the scraps. But there's a very, very interesting reality here. And that is the fact that whoever wins and becomes the leader of the Liberal Party is almost certainly going to lose the election that will probably be called before the middle of the year. So it really is a question of who is going to be the sacrificial lamb who gets to be Prime Minister for, all of 3 months, if they're lucky, before they eventually lose in a landslide defeat for the Liberal Party. So if we're being honest, the Liberals are really just picking a lamb to head into the slaughterhouse in this election, and that's quite unfortunate. But on a more personal note, and maybe this is true for you too if you're close to my age, but like 2015 is really like the point at which I started becoming interested in politics on an international level myself. It feels like just yesterday that I was watching Justin Trudeau's like expose piece on John Oliver's show where he was explaining who he was and what it actually meant that he was going to become Prime Minister. So this has some personal weight for me. Trudeau is one of the final Western world leaders who will be leaving the stage, who was there before the global Trump era, the Brexit era, this real combative era of politics that we've had 2016 onwards. And I find it quite meaningful, honestly. This is a man who was elected during the Obama years, saw the end of that, lasted for all of Trump's term, all of Biden's term, and is now going to be there just at the start of Trump's return to power. So this is a man who has been through 4 presidencies, 3 presidents, and his story is coming to an end now. So as we begin to move into, in 2025 onwards, the post-Trudeau era of politics, and really say farewell to the last remaining leader from before the Trump era, I think it's pretty important to remember that, especially in politics, as long as they might seem they stick around, nobody lasts forever.